Hello, Tom with Capo Fetish. Today we're going to talk about 10 artists whose entire legacy is built around a single successful album. I have 10 here to showcase. Without further ado, here's an album here that's almost 50 years old. They have this particular artist band has one album in their discography. They've never put out another album. I'm sure you know who I'm talking about. They're from the UK. They had a lot of PR back in the late 70s in the UK, a lot of media coverage. Not as much here in the US. They did have a disastrous tour in 1978, broke up, then reunited years later in 1996. I'm talking about the Sex Pistols, never mind the Bollocks. This album is nearly 50 years old. It has had so much impact on rock and roll. It's been influenced by, of course, punk music. Even metalheads like this album. Alternative music lovers love this album. But it's incredible. When you think about it, there aren't many bands in rock and roll that have had just one single album in their discography that has had this kind of impact. So I read recently that the Sex Pistols have reunited, but without Johnny Rotten as the lead singer. There's been a lot of legality issues and problems going on. But I don't know, how could you even perform without Johnny Rotten at the helm? How could you even consider, reuniting the Sex Pistols without Johnny Rotten? It's like not having Lennon in the Beatles or not having Pete Townsend in the Who, but they did it. They did a few shows. I haven't seen any videos online, but anyway, this is a prime example of a band that has pretty much coasted on one album their entire career. Sex Pistols, never mind the Bollocks, still a very powerful album and one of the best punk albums ever. Another one, moving up to 1979, there was a band that came out of nowhere, seemingly out of nowhere, LA band, and put out a song that was on the airwaves nonstop throughout the summer of '79. It's still a huge single. It's one of the, one of those singles that as soon as it starts playing, you know what it is. I'm talking about Get the Knack, the song My Sharona. When you think about the Knack, you don't really think about their second album, which was sort of a flop. Their third album was a total flop. This album, though, was all over the airwaves back in 1979. Of course, the huge hit My Sharona. But there was also some other songs that got a lot of airplay that don't really get any airplay anymore. And that's like songs like She's So Selfish, Good Girls Don't, Heartbeat. I saw these guys open for the Kinks in '87 at the Santa Barbara Bowl, and I'd say 3/4, 90%, 95% of that entire set list was this album. And when you think about the Knack, this is really the album you think about. And this is really their legacy right here. This album, My Sharona, Get the Knack from 1979. Another band, there was an artist named Pete Droge in the mid 80s. And I always thought that this lead singer's voice sounded just like that. He was, Pete Droge was kind of like a, kind of an adult alternative kind of singer-songwriter. And I always thought that was him when I heard this album. I'm talking about the Wallflowers, Bringing Down the Horse from 1996. Now, they put out other albums after this, but they were all, let's say, they weren't very successful. I bought the album after this called Breach. I immediately purged it, did not like it. There were some fine songs on here, and this got a lot of airplay, a lot of coverage. You've got like Sixth Avenue Heartache, One Headlight. I bought this album solely on the song Three Marlenas. I think that song is absolutely stellar. Saw these guys too around 19, or maybe it was around 2000 at the Santa Barbara's Arlington Theater. It was a great show. But this is, when you think of the Wallflowers, I mean, this is pretty much it. This album really was a huge, huge hit. And I'd say their legacy is pretty much built around this particular album here. So Bringing Down the Horse from the Wallflowers from 1996. A guy that played with several bands before he went solo. He played in a band called The Herd. He also played in Humble Pie. Played on this incredible album here, this Live at the Fillmore, Rockin' the Fillmore. This is one of those just fantastic, infectious live albums with Steve Marriott just giving it his all, right? And then other like great studio albums here, like As Safe as Yesterday Is, which is more kind of like the mellow side of Humble Pie than more folky kind of Humble Pie. And this artist too put out a solo album or two before this album came out. But once this album came out, it became one of the biggest selling albums of all time, one of the biggest selling live albums of all time. And when you think of Peter Frampton, or most people think of Peter Frampton, it's Frampton Comes Alive from 1976. I don't know how many copies this has sold. I don't know, 10 million, 15 million, not sure. But to this day, 3 of the songs in this album still get a lot of airplay. Baby, I Love Your Way, Show Me the Way, Do You Feel Like We Do, a long extended version with all the voice histrionics and noises. But yeah, I mean, this is a very talented artist. I mean, when this album came out, he became a global star, a superstar. Remember the Sgt. Pepper movie, that ill-fated, just trashy Sgt. Pepper movie soundtrack with Aerosmith and the Bee Gees? You know, he was in there. It seemed like after this album, he pretty much imploded. He came out with I'm With You, and it was kind of a moderate hit, but everything after that just kind of fell to the wayside. And it's a shame because he's a brilliant guitarist. He did some great work in Humble Pie and The Herd. He's put out some good solo material, but really when you think of Frampton, the majority of people out there think of Frampton. They think of this album, and it's a fine live album, but I don't think he ever recovered from the massive stardom of this album and I'm sure it had quite an effect on him. So anyway, yeah, Frampton Comes Alive is another example. I mean, his legacy is pretty much built on this album. When he still tours, I think he's kind of done touring, he would feature a lot of tracks from this album. So Frampton Comes Alive from 1976. Another one too, really sad story. This guy could have gone on to so many musical highs. You know, he had so much talent. The son of Tim Buckley, Jeff Buckley, his album, his sole album that he released, Grace. Just an incredible album and very influential to 1990s music. You could hear a lot of people coming out with a falsetto voice once this album came out. Tom York from Radiohead employed that kind of singing. The guy from Coldplay, on, Muse, all these bands pretty much copied Jeff Buckley's style, but none of them really came close to this kind of talent. Not only could he sing falsetto, he could sing anything. He could sing the phone book. This album is just almost near perfect. You've got the definitive version of Hallelujah on here. So many great tracks on here. So real. I mean, these songs just really, really get inside you. They really do something. The title track, Grace. Mojo Pin, that last song on the album, Dream Brother, is freaking amazing. And this is his sole album he released in his lifetime. And when anybody thinks of Jeff Buckley, it's pretty much this album. He did put out there was a posthumous release called Sketches for My Sweetheart the Drunk, which I think Tom Verlaine was initially going to produce. I mean, there are a few highlights on here, but it doesn't have the consistency of Grace. He does a great version of Back in New York City by Genesis from the Lamb Lies Down on Broadway album. I love the second song on here called Everybody Here Wants You. But you could kind of tell these really aren't real finished tunes. I mean, it doesn't have the grasp of Grace. Another album I really like by Jeff Buckley is this EP. It's been now expanded to a longer, more expanded live version, and this is Live at Cine, which I believe came out before Grace. It really showcases what an amazing talent he was early on. He does a version of what is it called? The Way Young Lovers Do from Astral Weeks from Van Morrison. It's just unbelievably captivating. Other great songs on here that would appear on Grace, like Mojo Pin, Eternal Life. There is an expanded version I think I'd like to get of the entire show. But yeah, Jeff Buckley, wow, what a sad thing. We lost him so early. He could have really gone on to some really amazing musical heights. But we still have the Grace album. There's some great live footage of him out there. But everybody's going to always remember him by this album here, this phenomenal album here, Grace, from 1994. Another great one here, too. She's still making albums. She's a fantastic singer-songwriter. She's the daughter of Ravi Shankar. Nora Jones, her first album. Huge hit. But I've never really heard anything other than this album. Maybe because I haven't really explored the catalog, but nothing really else has made much of an impact, at least on a lot of other like radio and internet. I really don't hear much about Nora Jones anymore. But this album is fantastic. I need to explore her catalog. I'm sure there's other gems in there, but I think when most people think of Nora Jones, they think of this first album of hers, Come Away With Me. Just a great mellow kind of late night kind of cocktail kind of album with those kind of those jazz elements, singer-songwriter elements. Really great stuff. Nora Jones. Another one too, who had one outstanding record. She put out other albums afterwards, but it seemed like she was kind of like her standing with the alternative crowd kind of went to the wayside after a few albums. But there's no doubt that this first album from her is her best album and her most well-known, and pretty much cements her legacy. And this is Exile in Guyville by Liz Phair, which came out in 1993. I bought her second album, Whip Smart, I believe it was called. I didn't really care for that and purged that. And then eventually, I think, you know, the corporations got a hold of her and wanted to make her into kind of an Avril Lavigne kind of star. And that really kind of was pretty much of a failure. But I don't know what she's doing now. I did see her about a year ago in Tucson, and she played this entire album in its entirety. And it was amazing. I really didn't go in with a lot of high expectations, but she surpassed my expectations. The band she had playing behind her were amazing. So Liz Phair is pretty much known. Her legacy is pretty much this album right here, Exile in Guyville from 1993. And if you want to hear any of her early demos, this came out somewhere around the mid-90s, 95, I believe. It's called Juvenilia. Has her early demos on it. It's fantastic. Just her and a guitar, her electric guitar. Very raw demos. Really cool stuff. Another band, too, from the mid-90s that really only had one huge album. They were huge for a while, but I see they're still playing around at like casinos and stuff. But this album is pretty much what they're known for. The Gin Blossoms' New Miserable Experience from, I believe, 1992? Great album, very good power pop. Great songs on here like Found Out About You, Hey Jealousy. But I never really heard anything other than this album that really struck me. And I'd say their legacy is pretty much built around this album. New Miserable Experience from the Gin Blossoms. Another great talent, just like Jeff Buckley, wasn't around very long. She put out one album, but the second album was absolutely pretty much cemented her legacy and her absolute artistry. And that is Amy Winehouse, the album Back to Black. Just a modern day classic. Real tragic figure, it's kind of like the Kurt Cobain story. Once the fame kicked in, the drugs kicked in more, the depression, the mental illness, all that media coverage just kind of did her in. And this is just a fantastic record, old school, kind of early 60s, kind of R&B soul. Me and Mrs. Jones, so good. You Know I'm No Good, Back to Black, Just Friends, Rehab. He Can Only Hold Her. It's just a fantastic album all the way through. Unfortunately, we will never hear another thing from Amy Winehouse. But this is pretty much, when you think of Amy Winehouse, you think of this album right here, Back to Black, an absolute classic. And then last on the list, I have to throw these guys in here. They have been coasting on this album for nearly 40 years. They're still selling out huge arenas, and I would bet that 90% of the people in that audience come to hear most of the songs from this album here. Guns N' Roses, Appetite for Destruction. Yes, they put out Use Your Illusion 1 and 2. A covers album, Spaghetti Incident, and they put out that Chinese Democracy album, which took 15 years to make, but I guarantee you that most people are still filling arenas because of the success of this album. 3 of the songs on this album, Welcome to the Jungle, Sweet Child of Mine, Paradise City, have been featured in numerous movies, video games, you name it. These songs have been just plastered over the radio since about 1988, and they never stopped playing them. And that's another example. I think their whole legacy pretty much rests on this particular album here. It's not the Spaghetti Incident or Use Your Illusion 1 or 2. This is the album here. So those are 10 examples, ladies and gentlemen. If you have any more to include, throw them in the comments section. As always, thanks for watching. If you dig the content, just press the subscribe button. It's free. That's one of the few things you can get for free anymore is a subscription to YouTube. And as always, thanks again, and we'll see you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.